I keep seeing Ben Shapiro make the same mistake, and I'll tell you what that is here in a second. First of all, I really appreciate what Ben Shapiro does and who he stands for. He is, extreme conservative. His intellectual capacity and thinking on his feet is stellar and mind-boggling. But the mistake that he continues to make is that he continues to take the middle ground when it comes to climate change. He always takes the middle ground on this, and I find that troubling. And I understand the pressure there. Once you have a following, you want a larger following, and if you really feel like you're making a difference in the world, then you want to appeal to more and more people. And so maybe he feels like he's appealing to more people by taking this middle path of climate change is real, but it's not necessarily man-made. And by doing that, maybe he doesn't lose access to all the Jewish constituency that are heavily liberal. And maybe that's the case. But the mistake that he is making is Ben Shapiro is trusting the science. He is trusting the science that is presented about climate change. He is trying to be intellectual and factual and fair and balanced. And the question that you really got to ask, though, is where is this data coming from? Where is this data that says that everything is warming coming from? Now, so if science is true, that it is to be taken very seriously and very factual because it is peer-reviewed, then should we not be able to peer review it? Now, no, that's really not allowed because only science can peer review science. But where are the intellectuals outside of the scientific community allowed to peer in and say, hey, you're missing a few things and we'd like for you to address this and you need to straighten this out and you need to get your act in order before you begin to try to tell the entire world what to do. So consider this, that before 1890, there was no standardized way of measuring temperature. Joe Blow over here might have been measuring in his backyard. Matt over there might have been measuring on a hillside. Somebody might have been measuring down by a stream or in the backyard under a shade tree. There was no standardized way of measuring. And so that automatically corrupts the data before 1890. Along with this, you've got to understand there was much less data being collected early on. Who was the first person that thought of collecting temperature data? Well, I don't know, but when they first collected the data, then maybe it spread to two people. They're like, well, maybe I should start collecting it as well. And that has grown over time, and now, we're collecting data all over the world. But there was less data at the beginning. And so the best we can do is compare massive data sets now to smaller data sets then. And anybody that knows anything about math and charts and the truth knows that this absolutely doesn't work and can't work. Along with that, let me say it can't work. It could work under the rarest of circumstances that you were measuring exact qualifications things, but science knows that we can't do that. That's why we average things. And taking an average from smaller data set against a larger data set, it just does not work, except in the most generalized fashion. But along with this, what about the natural nature cycles? It doesn't matter if you're a creationist or an evolutionist or a long day theory. Like, are there not natural cycles that we see that are going on? Like the temperature changes between daytime and nighttime. It changes season to season. Those of us that are old enough remember it has changed decade to decade. And so why would we not just consider this a normal course of life? Why in the world is it being propagated as this super emergency? Well, all of this gets worse. It is worse than that. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, they collect temperature across the United States, and they have written up some rigorous guidelines on how to set up temperature stations and whatnot. But as Alan Watts, I think his name's Alan Watts, has begun to investigate, what he was looking into was like, where are these temperature stations at? Like, if we know that temperature can be corrupted by putting it in the shade or whatnot, are there any things that are now happening that might bias the information? And what he has found is that our temperature measuring locations are located primarily to the tune of 90+%, I think it's upwards of 96%, in urbanized settings. Anyone who knows anything about heat sink, and what we know about heat sink is when a sun comes over and warms the seats of your car, if you don't have tinted windows, and you go to sit on those seats of your car a little later in the day, woo, heat sink, baby. Or if you accidentally lean over there and put your hand on somebody's black car while you're outside after work talking to them, and whoa, I just burnt my hand, because the radiation from the sun heats up objects here on Earth and sinks into them, and it slowly releases this heat over time. And so what we know is that in urbanized settings, it is hotter. Just flat out, it's more hot. And so the gravel that is on construction sites will heat up more so than grass. And then the asphalt highways will heat up more than somebody's yard. And then as we give up yards for apartment structures and whatnot, the roofs on those a lot of times will catch and hold heat, unless they're prepped against that. And so you've got all these brick buildings and block and concrete. Anybody knows anything about construction knows there's concrete everywhere in an urbanized setting. And all of this is located more so around these temperature stations that are gathering this data. And this stuff is encroaching upon these temperature sensors. I think they have to be 100 feet away from anything that's non-organic to actually get a good and fair reading. And this is just not the case. And this has been discovered. So let's get away from the whole argument of what's going on, and let's just get back to peer reviewing. What does the data say? Like, how is the data being collected? What's going on here? And why this heavy agenda? Why has it got to be pushed as a crisis? Well, if you're a Christian, the Bible tells you that you have to be as wise as serpents. And since we know that mankind is fallen, there are real serpents among us who have some very devious plans. And with these devious plans, one of the things is you need to understand there are big dollars, huge dollars behind climate preparedness. Let's do something about all of this. You have to understand there is massive amounts of money being invested in these emerging new technologies that, if mandated, will make some people mega wealthy. And let's say, once you've got the government looking at something, and this is popping up in the government all the time, and the scientists are continuing to push, the earth is warming. The earth is warming. It's getting hotter and hotter. I agree with this guy. This guy agrees with me. It is hotter. And everything's going to increase by 4 degrees Celsius in 100 years or so. And all of this is getting hotter. We've got to do something. And so if they can get the politicians to leverage big money, then people can become wealthy across the board. And you've got to understand, like, the average human guy, that's out there trying to achieve, like, he wants to become a millionaire. We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars in tax revenue is what these people that want this climate change, they want a total focus upon this. And you've got to understand that, let's say some of these measures are passed. If some of these measures are passed, then who do we put in charge? Who knows the most about this? Oh, the scientists do. Well, okay, let's bring you in on board, and you can Oh, you take referral fees? Okay. You need speaking fees? Do you need counseling fees for all of your hard-hitting information? You have to understand there is some nefarious things going on behind all of this. So the difference, or the mistake that Ben Shapiro is making, is that he's got to understand there is a difference between hard science and fraudulent scheming. And I really think he probably just respects the scientific community. And as you've heard me say many times, I am for hard science. But man, we are failing to see the big picture of all the corruption that's going on out there. And speaking of corruption and whatnot, why on earth, and it might be actually under this video, why on earth now, if you say the magic words that I've already said several times within this, is there a blue banner now that pops up? And why is that being screened or vetted by the United Nations? What does that have to do with free people? What does that have to do with free speech? What does that have to do with me sharing very real information that somebody has gathered from his professional life and actually gathered money together to go around and study the factuality of things, somebody that's actually peer reviewing this stuff? And why is that now like being screened? And, like, you should really take care that this idiot above the blue bar is probably speaking a bunch of falsehood, and we don't want that. There is an emergency. Why is somebody else out there allowed to be controlled what you see? And it's going to get worse unless you take action, unless you step up. Maybe if you're just a viewer, contact YouTube. Write them. Say, hey, I don't like the stuff being vetted. I don't like it. Now, I think what's eventually going to happen is it's going to be vetted silently. But, we can try. Hang in there. Stay vigilant.